everyone, and welcome to Only in San Jose, a podcast about demystifying and democratizing the process around civic participation in local government, ground zero of systemic change. My name is Alina Yin, and I will be your host. So today we are going to be talking about the Board of Fair Campaign and Political Practices, which I will refer to as Board, which, by the way, I learned recently there is technically no difference whether you call them an advisory committee, a board, or a commission. It's all the same. Those particular naming nuances come from really just personal preference of either the council, the staff, or the commissioners themselves. Now, I felt it was important to cover this board ahead of the November 3rd elections, which, if you have not registered to vote yet, there is a link in the show notes, and the deadline for California is October 19th. So recently in the news, some of you may have heard about the new ballot measure that has three main categories. Number one, the Strong Mayor Initiative. So right now, the mayor has only slightly more authority than their fellow council members, and that is through creating budgets and making council committee appointments. With this initiative, what would change is the mayor could veto council decisions and make that final decision. Additionally, the mayor would be able to hire or fire or direct staff and department heads. And also, when it does come to firing department heads, for example, like the city manager, that is something that could only be done through a council approval. And so this initiative would kind of eliminate those processes and give the ultimate power to the mayor. Number two is moving the mayoral elections to align with the presidential elections due to the higher voter turnout. So instead of electing a new mayor in 2022, it would be moved to 2024, and current Mayor Sam Liccardo's term would be extended by 2 years to make up for that gap. Lastly is campaign finance regulations and reform, which technically does not have to go on the ballot at all because council holds the authority right now to already approve such measures if they wanted to. To discuss how all of this ties into the Board of Fair Campaign and Political Practices is our guest, current chair of the board and expert in the field and San Jose resident, your neighbor, Adrian Gonzales. Adrian, could you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, your background, your professional and lived experiences, and how you came to be on this particular board?
I'd love to. So first, in my full-time career, I am a public sector management consultant who focuses on state and local government. And the next question I typically receive is, well, what do you consult on? And my typical response is everything. As an analyst and consultant, I work with cities and counties, nonprofits, to evaluate the efficiency and effectiveness of a wide range of government programs. I guess if I were to sum it up, I'm just a policy wonk looking to help governments better serve their communities. To tell you a little bit more about how I ended up on this board requires a little more context about my personal history. So first, I was born in Whittier, California, which is a growing mid-sized city on the eastern edge of LA County. So as a local, I ended up attending Whittier College, where I majored in political science and public policy. Now, I don't know how many people know this off the top of their head, but among my alumni peers, I can count former U.S. President Richard Nixon, whose Watergate scandal is actually responsible for catalyzing sweeping change in federal and state ethics laws. California's own Political Reform Act was approved by voters in 1974 in response to Nixon's scandals. So I just find it a little funny that as a fellow alum, I've ended up as an arbiter of ethics laws. But I just want to clarify, and I promise you that I am not a crook. So, post-graduation, I ended up moving to San Jose to work for a government consulting firm that is actually run by a former city manager of San Jose. Since that time, I've worked for different firms, including as a contract auditor for the Board of Supervisors here in Santa Clara County. And so as someone who was not originally from this community, I wanted to find ways to connect and give back. So when I saw an announcement in 2015 to apply for the board, which at that time was known as the Ethics Commission, I thought it was a perfect way to apply my expertise as an auditor and policy analyst to serve my community. In 2017, I was elected by my peers to serve as chair of the commission and have been entrusted with this privilege every year since. As the chair, I'm responsible for managing our agenda and business, running our meetings and public hearings, and serving as a spokesperson for the board. Due to the nature of our work, I do my best to refrain from developing any personal relationships with the mayor or council members to avoid any appearance of impartiality, since we are sometimes tasked with enforcing laws against these same individuals. So I do take my responsibility very seriously to do my best to serve the people of San Jose in an impartial manner.
That's great. And I'm so glad that, you're on the board, and even if you're not from here, I think a lot of people can probably identify that if they move to a job and it's not their community, there's often like this gap of how do I connect with the community that I'm living in, and is it okay for me to join this position even though I'm not from here? And it's really good that it is open to everybody who lives in San Jose, regardless of where you're from, and it's not limited by your, wherever you are from. Right. And then the commission, um so let's break it down for listeners who are not as familiar. And I'm just going to read, on the website, city's website, the San Jose Board of Fair Campaign and Political Practices. This commission is charged under Chapter 12.04 of the San Jose Municipal Code to enforce Title 12, and they do this in three ways. And they monitor compliance with all campaign and ethics ordinance, and they review and investigate allegations of violations, and they also make recommendations to council regarding campaign and ethics regulations. But, in your own word, and for people who are not as familiar with all the legalities and, might be intimidated by this talk, I would love to hear you explain it in your own words of what you do and why this board is important.
Sure. The way I view the role of the board is really through two lenses. And the first is to serve as an independent enforcer of the city's election and ethics laws. So we are a semi-judicial body. We have a contract law firm that we work with that conducts investigations of complaints that are filed to the board for review. The second lens that I view the board through is as an independent advisory body to the city council. So we do receive recommendations from the city council to look at different policy issues relating to the city's election, campaign finance, and ethics issues. So we review those, conduct policy studies, and provide recommendations about how to improve, streamline, or clarify our laws.
And so you receive some direction from city council, but does the board initiate anything on their own that they happen to be interested in, or see that another city is doing it?
So technically, the board does have its ability on its own accord, if it wants to pick up a policy issue to study and refer to the city council for consideration. We also do have a process in place called the biannual review. This is a charter requirement that the city conduct a review every 2 years. It starts with our board, and so usually we work with the city clerk and the city attorney, and we look at cases from the past 2 years to find where there are trending problems or issues that maybe we can help address through changing and updating policy. So that comes out every other year. We had a study published in the fall of 2017 and another referral that went out in the fall of 2019.
So yeah, I'm gonna jump back because I went ahead there. But can you explain, the order of law as it applies to San Jose? I know there's the Political Reform Act that you mentioned, and there's a few like state, and then there's local, and then there's municipal. Yeah, can you walk us through that?
Of course. And this is, of course, one of the most convoluted parts of complying with election laws, is that there are different layers. So first and foremost, as a state, California has established a baseline foundation known as the Political Reform Act. And so these are a set of laws that address campaign finance, election, and ethics laws for the entire state of California, not only for state agencies, but for local governments as well. In California, cities have the ability to adopt more stringent than the state baseline if they wish to when it comes to, I mean, really any law,
Mm-hmm.
but especially for campaign finance and election. We have several agencies in California that create their own enforcement bodies. So that is how here in San Jose, outside of the state, we also have our Board of Fair Campaign and Political Practices to enforce our city laws here in San Jose.
Okay, and then the two laws that the board works with is the city charter and the municipal code. And I know that there is some nuances there. And can you walk our listeners through that?
Sure. So first, to understand, a city charter is like the constitution for your city. And so these are a framework of laws for your city to abide by. And really, the only way to change or update these laws is through a vote of the people, through a ballot measure
Mm-hmm.
approved through an election. So it's very important that when we make changes to the city charter, that we're very careful because they're semi-permanent and very difficult to change in the future.
Hmm.
So in our city charter in San Jose, we have a section called the Code of Ethics. And the Code of Ethics outlines the responsibility of the mayor to do this biannual review I mentioned
Mm-hmm.
of the ethics laws and the responsibility of the city to create a code of ethics. So in practice, the code of ethics in the city charter is manifested through the municipal code, and that
Hmm.
is Title 12 that you mentioned before. So that is our quote unquote code of ethics, but really it's a breadth of election, campaign finance, and ethics laws.
And so now most California cities kind of stop at the Political Reform Act, this baseline foundation. But there are five California cities that have established, ethics commissions like ours, well, formerly known as ethics, but now the board. And however, all of these five cities, there is something different and unique only in San Jose. So can you tell us about that and what it means?
Yes. So in California, our peer agencies that have a set of municipal laws like ours are San Francisco, Oakland, Los Angeles, and San Diego. What makes San Jose different from the rest of these agencies is that their ethics commissions have more established resources and protection. And so, first and foremost, all of these agencies are actually recognized in their city charters. So, again, they have more protection because anytime you can want to change the law, you have to actually go through a vote of the people.
Mm-hmm.
So, it cannot be changed like a municipal code at any time by a vote of the city council. So, these cities not only protect their existence and their authority, but also all of them have language about how the city is responsible for providing them with some base level of resources. So this includes giving them a budget so that they can hire staff, lawyers, analysts, so that they can not only do reactive investigations like we do in San Jose,
Mm-hmm.
but also do proactive auditing to ensure compliance of candidates running for office. So here in San Jose, we do not have any recognition in the Code of Ethics in the Charter. It is just general language about the responsibility to have ethics laws in San Jose. And so our only authority really comes from Title 12 in the Municipal Code,
Mm-hmm.
which again can be changed at any time and is changed quite frequently by the City Council for different reasons. And so at this current time, the way we're structured is we don't really have funding beyond the contract that we have with our independent law firm.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't have full-time lawyers or analysts. We don't have a proactive arm to do monitoring.
And this really, I mean, from a resident perspective, I feel like this sets us behind, especially as the mayor likes to say that, we're the capital of innovation. And what you were saying earlier about reactive and proactive, can you explain more about like because we don't have funding and dedicated staff, there are certain things that the board is unable to provide. I think you know people who are looking to run for office and find that process very confusing, and also just whatever else is happening in the landscape that might impact San Jose, positive or negative.
Right. So there's a large web of effects by not giving us the appropriate staffing and resources that we need. So here in San Jose, I think about one of the first biannual reviews I was involved in 2017. We, in that study, had asked the city council for money to hire a couple staff. So that not only do we have the ability to better control our reactive investigations, but to create a process to do proactive auditing. Um, and that referral went to the Rules Committee of the City Council, and a couple members of the City Council, including the mayor, Mayor Liccardo, as well as Councilmember Carrasco, made comments to the theme of, here in San Jose, we don't have an abundance of issues when it comes to noncompliance with Title 12. However, the absence of violations doesn't mean that violations aren't occurring, and especially when you don't have a process to do that proactive compliance auditing to ensure that people are always abiding by our laws. And so I find this is really a good learning lesson, because this past year in 2019, one of those same individuals, Councilmember Carrasco, was actually involved in a series of complaints that were filed before the Board of Fair Campaign and Political Practices.
Mm-hmm.
And really, most of these complaints were actually focused on technical issues about filing the campaign finance disclosure reports.
Mm-hmm.
And so candidates, whether they're veterans, like a council member that's been elected, or a first timer, they can get really frustrated by some of these technical issues of just filing the paperwork correctly. They don't do it in malice if they have a non-compliance issue,
Mm-hmm.
but it's still very serious, because this is the one tool we have to be transparent for the public to understand where money's coming from and how it's being used. And so, based on the way that we are structured currently with our limited resources and staffing, and our policy for conducting investigations, which is created by the City Council, we didn't have an ability to work with the City Council member proactively to say, hey, this is a technical violation, but let's fix it now before it becomes, a public hearing and a formal investigation.
Mm-hmm.
And so, because we don't have the staffing or process to do that, it became kind of a big issue in the press, which I know the council member didn't appreciate.
Mm-hmm.
It becomes a full public hearing. And so, by giving us the appropriate resources, we can avoid issues like that. And we can really help the community at large, especially new people running for office, like you mentioned, really lower the barrier to entry to running for office by having more resources to help candidates with compliance.
Fascinating. Okay. And I know that, even Mayor Liccardo himself was recently caught in a violation. And are you familiar with that? Can you speak to us a little bit about that?
So, in addition, I've been talking a lot about campaign finance, but Title 12 also has a set of ethics laws. A portion of that includes conflict of interest laws. And so I think the issue you're referring to is this past year, Mayor Liccardo had received a lot of bad press because he had some issues in properly disclosing some of his real estate interests in downtown San Jose, when he was at the same time involved in voting on development agreements with Google,
Mm-hmm.
or the sale of city property. And so there was a lot of press about this, public discussion. It didn't look good to stakeholders in the community, because there could be a conflict of interest if you're, as a council member, voting on something that's going to impact your financial holdings. This case didn't actually become a complaint filed before the board,
Mm-hmm.
but it is an example of how we could have worked with the mayor and his office to ensure that they had gotten approval beforehand, to make sure that they were doing their best to comply with our disclosure laws when it comes to financial interests.
Okay. So correct me if I'm wrong, but the way I'm perceiving this is, unfortunately, the two people who didn't feel that this was a priority, those two same people ended up suffering the consequences of not having that guidance and that infrastructure in place that would have in turn probably helped them out and help both of them avoid negative press and negative perception, and also create a better transparency and trust with the community as a whole.
Absolutely. The role of the board is not to play gotcha. We're not here to find joy in levying penalties against individuals. That's not our job. Our job is just to hold public trust by ensuring that candidates are complying with our disclosure laws. And so, the mayor and Councilmember Carrasco are not bad people. I don't think there was any malice in what they were doing when they had non-compliance issues, but it is the perfect example of how, if we had the resources, we can avoid a lot of the negative press and issues that arise from our current situation.
Oh, yeah, and I definitely think first time campaign people who are running for office would definitely appreciate this resource. I actually was at a resource fair and I spoke with a young woman who's 22, and I have another friend who I believe is like 23, 24, and they're running for, the school board seats. They are also the very individuals that we do want running for these seats. And so it's a resource I see as a whole for the community.
I absolutely agree. It's difficult for first timers when they're running for office to comply with these complex laws because they don't always have the financing structure to hire a law firm or an
Mm.
accountant who's experienced in campaign finance reporting. So you often have to rely on volunteers to do this for you. And so if you don't have someone that has a skilled experience in doing this, you're have a higher risk of non-compliance. So the more that we can do as a city to promote compliance, again, the better we can serve the community.
Hmm. Okay. So speaking on compliance, I kind of want to understand a little bit more about the types of violations. You mentioned technical violations. Is there like a tier? And I know this is a bad analogy association, but like, between a misdemeanor and felony kind of charge, but like, what are the types of violations and uh, investigations that, the board does?
So it's a bit difficult to sum up the types of violations because we actually have a breadth of different election, campaign finance, and ethics laws in Title 12. And so when I refer to the early example of technical violations, these seem to be the most prevalent, which is really the baseline compliance with your disclosures, whether that's the campaign finance part when you're running an election, or your personal disclosures as an elected official, filing your Form 700, which is your statement of economic interest. So this is a form officials fill out to outline overview of their financial interests, including their income, investments in stock or businesses, real estate holdings, etc. So oftentimes you will find the prevalence of violations to be really these technical issues of did you fill out the form on time?
Mm-hmm.
Did you fill it out correctly? Do you have all the right information? Those are the biggest issues is just the basic filling out of forms.
So it's almost like doing your taxes, but without TurboTax or any kind of help.
Right, and it's more frustrating.
Okay. And yeah, so what other I guess are the more serious violations that are maybe not as common, but you see as well.
So some of the more serious violations here in San Jose, we have more stringent laws with what um, campaign committees can do with money after an election. So one of the biggest differences is if you're running for a state office, most state offices tend to allow you to raise money throughout the year. But here in San Jose, we actually have a window of time before an election and after when you can raise and spend money. So we've had a case in the past where one candidate, an individual that was running a campaign committee, had surplus money. And even though that individual had sought counsel from our city attorney about how to comply with how to dispose of surplus money after a campaign, he had still used that money to donate to other campaign committees, which in San
Mm.
Jose we prohibit.
Mm-hmm.
And so, in the world of campaign finance, um, that is seen as a way to level the playing field
Mm-hmm.
by prohibiting people from using their money for campaigns when everyone's supposed to be abiding by the same election cycle, the same window to raise and spend money.
Mm.
Um, so we had leveled a penalty against that individual, particularly because that individual had also asked for guidance from the city council or from the city attorney and then disregarded it.
Mm.
Um, so that was a big issue.
Ah, okay. And you had mentioned earlier too there are conflicts of interest, and there I'm sure there's a lot of different kinds, but what are some that the public should be aware of?
In California, we actually have in the State Political Reform Act a baseline set of rules about financial disclosures through the conflict of interest laws. And so this includes first disclosing what your financial interests are through Form 700 so that people, the public, can look up your forms on an annual basis to see what types of financial interests you have as a policymaker and whether there might be any conflicts in the decisions that you're making based on your financial interests. So looking at these Form 700 is really a great way to at
Mm.
least understand on a yearly basis where your council members and certain government officials have their money tied up in to evaluate and hold them accountable for decisions they make. There are also other issues of conflict of interest, like revolving door policies. So there are both state and local levels that if you, say, for example, you're a council member and you just termed out of office, you can't go work for a private sector company right after and lobby on an issue that you had just voted on. So let's say you're a council member who was advocating to renew a contract with a garbage collector, and then you go work for the garbage collector as a lobbyist. You actually couldn't go do that right after leaving office because it would be a conflict of interest.
Okay.
And that's just some of the examples.
Got it. Okay. So now that we have a baseline understanding of the structure and process by which the board works under the law, can we talk about some things that are happening right now? For example, the ballot measure that's coming up this November, and how that ballot measure, what exactly does it mean, and how it actually ties back to the board?
Sure, I'd love to dive into the Strong Mayor Initiative. But I think before we get into this specific initiative, it's important for the public to understand some history and context to this whole issue. So if we take a step back to at least 2018, a group in our community, the South Bay Labor Council, was a proponent and author of a fair elections initiative. And so this was a proposed ballot initiative, which had a couple of different proposals in there to really improve our election and campaign finance laws. And so they proposed moving first the mayoral and some city election cycles to align with presidential election cycles. And the point of that was to promote voter turnout. This same Fair Elections Initiative also had some prohibitions on certain campaign contributions. So they wanted to prohibit contributions from certain real estate developers, property owners, businesses who have city contracts, and lobbyists to mitigate conflicts of interest. However, since this was a public initiative, something brought forth by a member of the public, a separate organization from the city, ballot measures like this require public support by obtaining a certain percentage of signatures of registered voters in the city. And so this petition had actually failed to gather enough valid signatures. This past spring, it was confirmed. And so what was interesting is that, when this initiative failed, there was both rejoiced by some groups who didn't like it, and then mourning by groups that wanted to create more regulations for our campaign contributions, and as well as increasing voter turnout. In particular, leading up to the Strong Mayor Initiative, is that the mayor and a block of the city council were opponents to the Fair Elections Initiative. They expressed concerns over First Amendment rights issues when it came to the campaign contribution prohibitions. And they felt that maybe moving the election to a presidential election might create too much noise when you're trying to deal with local issues and national issues at the same time. So there was really this divide, not only in the city council, but in the community. And so after the Fair Elections Initiative failed to gather enough signatures, just recently, the mayor and his voting bloc of the city council came forward with their own proposal. So this is what you mentioned, the Strong Mayor Initiative. And just recently, on June 30th, the mayor and the city council had voted to adopt or to go forward in adopting a measure that amends the city charter to do several things. So first, they call it the Strong Mayor Initiative because they want to give the mayor more unilateral administrative authority over city operations. So they want to give some of the power from the city manager to the mayor. But at the same time, this initiative concedes and does include some proposals from that original Fair Elections Initiative pushed by the South Bay Labor Council. So it incorporates some changes, such as moving the mayor election to the presidential election cycle. And it does propose adopting some restrictions on campaign contributions. However, with the adjustment of the mayor election to the presidential election cycle, this initiative also proposes extending the current mayor's term for 2 years to make that happen. What's a little frustrating is that conventionally, any policy matter like this relating to the city's election or ethics laws are typically referred to us, the board, for consideration. However, at this point, our board has not been consulted on any of these recent proposals. We did originally receive a referral in the fall of 2018 to study that first segment of realigning the mayor election with the presidential election cycle.
Mm-hmm.
And in early 2019, the board unanimously supported the notion of moving this cycle to increase voter turnout.
Mm-hmm.
However, all of these new proposals I mentioned, the limiting campaign contributions, none of these have been referred to us for study. And to be fair, it's not just the mayor and city council that have neglected us in our role to study these issues, but even the South Bay Labor Council neglected to reach out to us to run their ideas by us. So there's really just this frustration overall that our role as a board, as an advisory board on these specific issues, has been ignored.
Interesting. And so just because I'm not super clear on it, so even though the petition failed to get enough signatures, the council members and the mayor, there's still another avenue of getting it on the ballot, and that's with a council vote. Is that correct?
Correct. So a ballot initiative can be sponsored either by a member of the community. So that was the South Bay Labor Council originally pushing the Fair Elections Initiative, or in accordance with state law, a legislative body, a city council, can also vote to sponsor their own ballot measure. And so after the first one failed, the city council decided that they would propose their own Strong Mayor initiative, which incorporated parts of the Fair Elections Initiative and then additional segments regarding the mayor's authority.
So, in an ideal world, if the South Bay Labor Council had, developed this proposal, they could have submitted it to the board first, and then you would run your own studies and investigations on the proposal and then put it forth. So there's kind of not only a little bit more support, but there's also, a little bit more accountability and collaboration maybe with the board and the public. Is that correct?
Right. So we could have spent time in evaluating what their specific proposals are, what some of the economic and financial costs might be, operational impacts, what it's going to mean to changing the power and structure and operations within the city of San Jose. But unfortunately, we were not presented with this opportunity to do it either by the city or South Bay Labor Council.
Okay. Well, I hope, this podcast really, illustrates for people that the board is a tremendous resource for the community, and that they're here, you're here, and open to having these conversations and helping to shepherd in the best policies for the community.
Yeah, I hope so. And honestly, it's not too late. Even though the city council just voted on June 30th to approve the concept of creating this ballot measure, the language hasn't been finalized yet.
Mm-hmm.
So despite these frustrating realizations, so one of the concepts that was pushed around at that June 30th meeting to approve the ballot measure is that some of the city council members had proposed establishing a charter review committee.
Mm-hmm.
So some members of the council wanted to take a step back and create an independent body to conduct a more comprehensive review of the changes that I was discussing, instead of just rushing through something that's going to have significant change on our city charter. And so that didn't receive enough votes at that meeting. However, in order to go forward with this ballot initiative, the city council is hosting a special meeting on July 28th to discuss the details of the ballot measure. So this is likely our last chance, our last opportunity as a community to pressure the city council to actually spend time reviewing all of these significant issues, as the city must submit the ballot measure to the registrar of voters, the county, by August 7th to be included in the November election. And so as a reminder, our city charter is like the city's constitution. It contains significant guidance about how the city operates, and the language in the charter can only be changed by a vote of the people through an election. So therefore, it is of the utmost importance that we don't take these changes lightly. And while I understand the mayor's push to get this ballot measure going for the November election, the more responsible action is to take a step back and allow a thorough, independent study of these proposed changes, and to obtain the appropriate feedback from the board, the public, and stakeholders in the community.
Wow. Okay. Wow, I feel supercharged now. That's good. And also, just wow, the pressure is on. Last chance. This is our last chance, people.
That's right.
Okay. So, Dialing down on the pressure a little bit is now that we have the context of how it relates to today's issues and like the baseline understanding of how the board works. Let's get into some logistics. The nuts and bolts of workflow. For listeners who might not be interested in applying. How much time is involved in certain aspects of the work. What can they expect?
Sure. So, as a member of the board, there's some basic level of requirements that are established in the municipal code. We're supposed to have meetings at least twice a year, but in practice, and ever since I've been on the board for the past 5 years, we tend to have meetings every month unless we have a issue meeting quorum or no pressing matters to address. Right now, we haven't met in several months due to the pandemic, but workload can really vary depending on what business we have before the board.
Mm-hmm.
There you can go for months and as a member of the board just show up and vote on certain items, not a whole lot of work to do outside. But if it's election season,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes we have a lot of complaints that are filed before the board.
Mm.
And so during that process, we usually get our investigative report a week before a public meeting.
Mm-hmm.
And some of these can be dozens if not hundreds of pages long, and it's about dense complex campaign finance issues. A fantastic way to spend your weekend, I know. But as a board member, you only have that week to really dive in and understand these issues in preparation for those public hearings. So it really depends on the season and our workload. It fluctuates. Again, there are times where you don't have much to do, and there could be times where you have to spend many hours preparing for important policy matters.
Okay. So we're nearing the end now, and very important, July 28th, special city council meeting. There will be a link in the show episodes. And there is also a current vacancy. And so what type of people, professionals do you think, should consider applying?
Yes, we do have a vacancy. Please, someone apply. Uh, so the board is one of the few commissions that has a little more requirements outlined in our ordinance code for qualifications in order to apply for seats.
Mm-hmm.
And so some of the basic stuff is you have to be a qualified elector, which means you must be a registered voter. And then there's some general language in there about how you're supposed to have some experience with campaign finance laws. So, for example, for me, when I first applied in 2015, I talked about first my experience as an auditor, a government auditor,
Mm-hmm.
as well as talked about my experience having once run for city council in the city of Whittier when I was younger, to demonstrate my experience understanding some of the issues with campaign finance laws. So I do want to emphasize that because of the authority of this board and some of the duties that we're tasked with, especially as being an arbiter and enforcer of the law,
Mm-hmm.
it would be great to have people that have experience in the analytical field. So whether you're a lawyer or a policy analyst or auditor like me, someone who's comfortable really diving into technical issues would be the best set of credentials really to join our team. And it's important to have those because when we have investigative cases, we could be leveling penalties worth hundreds, if not thousands of dollars against people who have non-compliance issues. So there's a great deal of responsibility in being a part of this board. So it's not just something you join and sit back on. It does take some level of self-responsibility to participate and be a member of our team.
Yes, and also just a great level of impact. If you're there's so much talk about campaign finance and like influenced elected officials, and if you care about that stuff, this is the board to join and to work on those changes. And as soon as it's approved or within your term, you can expect to make a lot of change and progress in this area.
Right. I will say the city council, we don't always see eye to eye, the board and the city council. Sometimes they don't approve some of our recommendations, but when our recommendations do go through, it's really great to see the lasting impact we have when we, as a team, as volunteers on this board, have been able to effectively make positive change in our campaign finance and ethics laws.
Yeah, and some tension is fine. I think tension is good because it all promotes, stronger growth and just stronger roots and infrastructure. So being able to really come together and work out the nitty-gritty details of those types of conversations and measures and policies, it only creates a more equitable and like robust outcome for everybody involved.
You know, we may not feel that way when we're in the middle of a heated debate, but absolutely, at the very end, the outcomes always justify the work we do.
Okay, so lastly, on a positive note, and if say the board is now recognized, and protected in the city charter, and you have allocated funding and you have staff, what do you envision on the board? What is the dream work, if you will, that you're hoping to be able to work on for the community?
So, as someone who's an independent government consultant, I always believe in looking at best practices and looking at what other peer agencies are doing. Now, I always believe that there's a way to improve what we're doing. And so, when I look at something like the Board of Fair Campaign and Political Practices and the mission that we're tasked with, I really truly believe that we need to be a fully autonomous agency with a great level of independence and resources to do our job. So, that means getting some recognition in the city charter to
Mm-hmm.
protect our existence and the mission and objectives that we have, as well as securing us funding so that not only can we continue to investigate complaints filed before us, but also to monitor through proactive audits, compliance, as well as provide policy advice to candidates running for office and incumbents in office, again, to really better serve the public in meeting compliance with our complex laws, as we discussed earlier. Um, so hopefully, if we can push these changes in the future, and hopefully if we can do this through that charter review committee, and if we can get the city council to take a step back before we make changes to our city charter, we can incorporate some of those changes and really better serve our community as a whole.
Awesome. Amazing. Thank you so much for this conversation. I really
Yeah.
appreciated your thoughts, and this has been really eye-opening for me. And I can't wait to kind of like dig into these Form 700s. I feel like I could have another episode where we just break down, like, what does this section mean, and what does that section mean?
You might be one of the few people to be excited about this.
Yeah, I know. I'm an analytical person, so. All right. Well, thank you so much, Adrian.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you.
Now, I know that was a lot of information, and if anything, I really hope that everyone listening feels not only more informed, but maybe inspired, maybe empowered to really get involved in this facet of our local government. It is a small facet, but it has tremendous impact, as illustrated by our conversation with Adrian. And as we shared, there is a special city council meeting July 28th. If you have some strong opinions or feelings about this matter, feel free to voice them at the city council meeting. And there is also a current vacancy on the Board of Fair Campaign and Political Practices, so don't be shy about submitting your applications either. And all of the resources that we spoke about during this episode are all in our show notes. And that wraps it up now. So until next time, everyone.